Good evening, everyone. I'm Vivian Louie, the director of the Asian American Studies Program and Center here at Hunter College. I'm delighted to welcome you to our listening event tonight to celebrate learning from our past to build the future. Reflections from the Hunter College Asian American Studies Oral History Project. This project is a collaboration of Hunter College's Asian American Studies and HCAP. I've had the honor of working on this project with Hunter's Dr. Lynn Ahn, oral history educators Rochelle Kwan and Luigi Villanueva, and a stellar team of Hunter College students, many of them alums now. We started this project in the last days of 2019, and we pivoted with the pandemic, losing two key figures before they could be interviewed for the project. Corky Lee, the unofficial Asian American photographer laureate, and Harold Louie, Hunter alum, a key leader in New York City's Asian American, immigrant, and civil rights communities. I want to extend a big thank you to our team, the folks who so graciously shared of themselves and shared their stories, and to Hunter College President Jennifer Rabb and her amazing team, including the Provost Office, and of course, a thank you to HCAP for all their collective support. First, a few technical things to keep in mind. We are doing closed captioning. You might want to switch to side-by-side speaker view on Zoom, and feel free to join us in the chat. What is Asian American Studies at Hunter College? Hunter College offers CUNY's largest undergraduate program in Asian American Studies. We serve more than 1,000 students over the fall, the spring, and the summer. This semester, we have 23 classes spanning the humanities and the social sciences, including Filipino American literature that acclaimed writer Luis Francia long taught for us. Our recently launched Asian American Studies Center offers exciting public programming, like the 30th anniversary of the Asian American Writers Workshop that brought writer Purvi Shah, along with more than a dozen of her great colleagues, to campus. And thanks to a generous gift, we have just launched our search for the Helen Zia Distinguished Lecturer and Deputy Director in Asian American Studies at Hunter College. Helen Zia, of course, is an amazing journalist and activist and a key figure in the Asian American movement. This is truly a key moment in Asian American Studies at Hunter College. As we're going to learn tonight, the road to the undergraduate program's founding here at Hunter in 1993, and to the broader awareness of Asian American communities, it was a long road spanning decades of activism amongst Hunter College faculty, administrators, and students. Folks lived and left an exciting legacy of leadership and solidarity work, notably with the then Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department here at Hunter College, and also within the Asian American population itself, spanning 50 ethnic groups. Tonight, we're going to hear about 6 of those pioneers and from the wonderful students who researched them and interviewed them and were impacted by their experiences. And with that, I turn it over to Dr. Lynn Ahn.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, can you all hear me? Okay, I assume so. So good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone on behalf of the Hunter College AANAPISI project, HCAP for short. For those of you who are not familiar with us, HCAP is a student success program that helps students navigate college, explore their identities, and build community at Hunter College. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Education's AANAPISI grant program. So AANAPISI stands for Asian American and Native American Pacific Islanders Serving Institute. So as AANAPISI, Hunter College serves a high number of students who are AAPI, also first-generation college goers and or from low-income families. So at HCAP, we have students of all backgrounds in our programs, but we focus particularly on reaching Asian Americans and other first-generation college goers. So as some of you may know, we have programs like academic writing, speaking, mental health, financial literacy, and peer mentorship. And a particular note is our research skills programs, which have research methods, courses in Asian American studies, free research workshops, and undergraduate research program, where students are matched with faculty mentors. So this project, the Asian American Studies at Hunter Oral History Project, was really a project that came out from our undergraduate research program. So I remember the seeds of this project and my friendship with Rochelle and Dr. Vivian Louis was planted one rainy afternoon at a Starbucks that was by like Hunter, right? So I still remember that day. And all I could say was that the students really lucked out, because instead of just getting one faculty mentor, they got trained and mentored not by one, but by three incredible mentors. So a sociologist, an anthropologist, and a community oral historian, all of whom are committed to social justice and also finding great places to eat in New York City. So, it was really a pleasure and honor to get to know and work with the students who are presenting tonight. So aside from, being my undergraduate research assistant, they were also part of a community mentoring program that I ran at HCAP. So that program really focused on like racial identity exploration and professional skills development, so that students could really feel empowered to give back to their own communities. This is exactly what the students did in this project. They collected these oral histories, and collecting these histories is a political act in itself. These stories show the diversity in the Asian American experiences. The stories capture the multidimensional nature of the narrators. We saw pieces of them that went beyond just common Asian American stereotypes. Essentially, this oral history project is a testament that Asian American history is American history, right? And that storytelling itself is social justice. I promised the students that I wouldn't embarrass them too much, but I can't help myself. So bear with me a little bit while I share some of the wonderful things they are doing or have done since our project ended, right? So collecting oral histories with Muslim Americans, researching exploitative labor practices that contributed to massive COVID-19 deaths in nursing home residents, community organizing and work with queer Asian Americans, helping to develop mental health interventions for Asian American youth to address racial stressors, help carry out a community needs assessment to improve primary care for Chinese immigrants, right? So tonight is a celebration of stories, and I eagerly await to see these students continue to write their stories, leaving their own legacies as the narrators from this project have done. So thank you so much for celebrating with us tonight.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rochelle Kwan, and I am an oral history educator, cultural organizer, and an artist based here in Manhattan's Chinatown. And it has been my absolute honor to be working with Hunter College, Asian American Studies program, and HCAP and all of our students over the past 3 years to build this Asian American Studies at Hunter College Oral History Project. Like Lynn said, it started 3 years ago. It actually started even before the Starbucks, when Victoria, a Hunter student at the time, who you'll hear from later, came to one of my storytelling workshops. And we brought this storytelling workshop in person to Hunter in 2019. And then, as Vivian said, the pandemic happened and we had just gotten started. And so we wanted to keep it going. And so we brought everything online. And so over the past 3 years, we've been a multidisciplinary, multi-generational partnership between me, fellow artist Luigi Villanueva, Lynn at HCAP, Vivian at Asian American Studies program, all of our students, faculty, alum, and so many people who have been a part of this project with us. And over the course of these 3 years, we've trained students to prepare, conduct, archive, and produce oral history interviews with pioneers of the Asian American Studies program at Hunter College. So it started with students learning how to reach out to narrators, getting to know them, preparing interview questions, and then preparing themselves as interviewers. And then from there, we had students conducting and recording these oral history interviews with Hunter alum, archiving them into this growing oral history archive for future students, researchers, and generations to come. And then finally, from all of these full interviews, every student produced their own short audio story. And these are the stories that we'll be hearing today. So after these 3 years of working on this project with our students and our faculty, we've recorded and produced and archived 22 interviews with pioneers of the Asian American Studies program, only a few of which we get to hear today. So everything that we hear tonight is produced by a Hunter student in partnership with pioneers of the Asian American Studies program. And through the course of this program, we had our big goals of having our students, us on the team, to really learn about Asian Americans and Asian American studies histories through listening, doing oral histories, and connecting with each other. We've also had the goal to develop our students to be thoughtful, prepared, and connected in the world beyond Hunter College. And then finally, we wanted our students to learn about themselves as Asian Americans in today's Asian American Studies program. And so I'm so excited for us to go on this journey tonight and really time travel from the start of Asian American Studies, from its very roots, long before it was established, and then up to its establishment in 1993, all the way up until where it is today. And from there, I invite us to imagine the future of the Asian American Studies program and the center as we listen to these histories and reflections from our Hunter students and alum. And so I'm so excited to kick things off with our very first interview about a time long before the Asian American Studies program came to be. So our first interview is an interview between Shanlin, aka Shan Wu, and Daniel Iskakov. Shan is a lawyer, author, teacher, and legal analyst based in DC. Previously, the president of his local Asian Pacific American Bar Association. In this interview, Shan talks with Daniel about his parents, Doctors Cheng Su, aka C.T. Wu, and Julia Wu, both professors at Hunter College. Dr. Julia Wu was a professor in Hunter's School of Education. Dr. C.T. Wu was a professor in Hunter's Department of Geography from 1957 through until about 1984. In 1972, he published his book Chink, a documentary history of anti-Chinese prejudice in America, and was later appointed to the New York City Human Rights Commission. He's remembered as a teacher, mentor, activist, author, and friend to many. This is Shan Wu with Daniel Iskakov.
I am the son of Professor C.T. Wu and Julia Wu. They were both political refugees, both born in China prior to the 1949 revolution there. His father, my paternal grandfather, was actually a general in the nationalist army, the Kuomintang. And before the conclusion of the revolution there, my grandfather had resigned, which probably spared him his life, actually. He spent many years as a political prisoner in China, but had he still been an active member, probably would have been executed. My dad was actually on the last boat out of Shanghai as the Red Army was advancing in. And I think that very much gave him a long game viewpoint of governments and countries. And I think that grew out of my dad's own involvement as an undergraduate in China, where many of the students were quite politically active, strongly pro-democracy. My dad was very much in the forefront of that movement as a young man, pushing for reforms. So I think that very much caused him to study political geography, which is basically how the terrain and lands affect politics. So when he came to Hunter, he was in the geography department where he taught for his entire time there. So he and my mom both came to the United States for graduate school, and eventually they both got PhDs, and then they met, they got married, and they were living in New York, and that's how he came to teach at Hunter. And my dad and mom lived through the McCarthy era in the United States. My dad, as a Chinese student, was regularly interviewed by the FBI. They would make appointments and come to his office at Hunter College and chat with him once a month. And it was very much of a political litmus test. They would ask him his views on the Korean War conflict. And my dad actually devised a clever way to put an end to it. One day, when Douglas MacArthur had been recalled by Truman, the U.S. gave him a big ticker tape parade in New York, and my dad was late to the FBI appointment. And when he got to the office, he said to the FBI agent, I'm sorry I'm late, but I was at the parade for General MacArthur. Oh, he's a great American hero. And that was actually the last time that the FBI interviewed him. He was probably the only Asian American professor at that time in the geography department, if not at Hunter. He'd been very much of a pioneer just as an Asian professor in a major university. But it was interesting because I was not very aware of the implicit discrimination that he would have encountered, as did my mom, a female professor, where you would have no chance of ever being promoted to the chair of a department. And it was a tough fight even to get tenure. So I think those experiences all informed the way that he thought and was a genesis for his interest in the Asian American and in particular the Chinese experience in America. He really just saw a need for looking at the history of the Chinese in the United States and the legislation like the Chinese Exclusion Act and the different kinds of racism. And there was a publisher who was putting out a whole series of books on prejudice against particular ethnic groups. I was bullied a great deal in grade school, got beaten up, called ethnic slurs. I was bullied a great deal in grade school, got beaten up, called ethnic slurs. I remember coming home from school really upset with the bullying, saying to my mom, I hate being Chinese. And it wasn't until really he was writing the book that I sort of say, oh, this wasn't just an instance of my own experience. This is part of a much broader issue. But later in life, being able to grow out of that kind of trauma and look back on it in a historical framework is very valuable because you understand the self-hatred that can accompany that. Being very conscious of the movements that were going on in the 60s and 70s, my dad tended to be a mentor to young students. I was an only child and we had no extended family growing up, but we always had Chinese students visiting at the house and sometimes they actually lived with us. So I had sort of like this extended family of stepsisters or brothers, and many of them at Hunter also was a period of radicalization. And he eventually also did some public interest work in Chinatown with a group called Basement Workshop. And it was that thinking that led him to want to push for the Asian American Studies class because there was none at that time. And I think my dad very much understood that there is a transformational quality to having an Asian figure be at such a forefront in the media. So that propelled his own interest in being a human rights commissioner in New York City. So I think his vision was really for a more visible and more expansive role for Asians in our country, media, as well as the political. When I went into law, it was very much an effect of both my parents. They felt that a lawyer could make a lot of change, but most importantly, would be in a position to protect themselves. So for much of my career in law, I was a prosecutor and then private practice. It was really not until I became a commentator on television I was for the first time really aware of like how few Asians there were doing that. So I began to use that more as a platform to overcome the infrastructure implicit racism that we all carried. So I think for the future, it's important to focus on that sort of expanded role, expanded presence, and to teach and remind ourselves of all the history that's been forgotten and to keep unearthing that. If more people from a young age just assume, oh yeah, this was an important piece of history, that would make that fight much easier at the higher level, universities and colleges. Much later in life now, I feel like it's come a little bit full circle that a lot of that early activism, the issues that my dad was aware of, have now been made more explicit in my own life. And I do think if he were alive today, he would also see the opportunity in this situation to turn these crises into opportunities for more dialogue and understanding.
Thanks so much to Shan and to Daniel for this amazing conversation, and especially to you, Daniel, for being able to really navigate so much history across so many decades with Shan, and remembering his father and his mother. So we'll hear from Daniel a little bit later, because he's so talented and produced so many of these interviews. But for now, we'll dive into our next interview as we get a little bit closer to the buildup of the Asian American Studies program here at Hunter. So our next interview is between Ruby Sang and Crystal Huang. Ruby Sang was a lecturer, counselor, and director with Hunter's SEEK department. The SEEK department stands for Search for Education, Elevation, and Knowledge. One of the students who found their way to Ruby in the 1970s was Fei Chang. Fei Chang was an Asian American poet, writer, artist, activist, and Hunter student. She served as the director of Basement Workshop, and in 1972 taught Hunter's first Asian American Studies course. In this interview, Ruby speaks with Crystal to remember her friendship with Fei and also her important role as a counselor in bringing Asian American Studies to Hunter in the 1970s. And I see that Ruby is with us today. So this is Ruby Sang with Crystal Huang.
I started at Hunter College back in 1974 as a counselor / lecturer with the SEEK department. It stands for, the acronym starts for Search for Education, Elevation, and Knowledge, to try to give special admission to students that were slightly below the admission level, had the potential, but never developed it. I eventually went on to then become the director of counseling and then the acting chair director of the SEEK program before I retired. During that time, I was probably one of the few Asians at Hunter when it came to student services or any kind of social services with our students. Very little of them had any contact with administration or much less counseling, which we found to be probably one of the most important aspects, because many of these students were the first in college and did not have that kind of background in terms of family support. We had a lot of Chinese students coming in from Chinatown because we're right on that Lexington Avenue line. And many of the students were in need of bilingual education. So I think that we were probably more successful for our students. So I had some contacts within a lot of my students. And around that time, I was very pleased to meet a student that was there at Hunter by the name of Fei Chang. And she came to me and she said, I heard that there was an Asian counselor here in SEEK, and I wanted to make sure that I met her and get her involved with what we're doing. Fei was very much the visionary for Basement Workshop, which was one of the first arts organization on the East Coast. And the idea was to bring together all the different elements of the art world in this little space on Catherine Street. And we would have like live performances and readings. It was just a very exciting time. It just enriched everyone's life. I was very active. I was a member of the Writers' Workshop. I did poetry reading. That's how our friendship developed. And of course, we brought a lot of students in from Hunter to participate. And this was all a volunteer. I mean, we had no real budget. And in fact, Fei was the primary person who brought in almost $1 million to fund Basement Workshop. And she used to laugh about how she would go up to the Foundation Library up in DC to research on different grants. She'd see all these guys walking around with their three-piece suits, and she would come out with her denim overalls and t-shirt, and she would be there writing with all of them. Faye was not only a very strong community activist in Chinatown, she was a student activist at Hunter. It must have been in the late 80s. We decided that there's no Asian American course here at Hunter or anywhere really in the city. I think she was very instrumental in wanting to slant it in a different way. She kind of spearheaded the efforts. So this is when we started talking to the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department. And they were so supportive in advising us about how the course had to go through the Senate for approval. And they kind of helped us in the different departments to make sure that the vote was there. Being under the umbrella of the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department was probably one of the best things that happened to us because we were protected from a lot of the questions that I guess more traditional departments would raise about what is the legitimacy of this kind of study? Is it history? Is it literature? But, you know, the people that we brought in, the instructors, were community activists. What they did was to kind of bring in the community speakers, Project Reach, the youth groups, and the readings were there in terms of the history done on the West Coast, which was a good 10 years ahead of us. The people that did the actual courses pretty much stuck to their guns in making that differentiation, why the importance of Asian American versus Chinese history or Chinese literature or Japanese history. This was different. And I think the point being made is no, we have a history of Asians in America. From Hunter, we then reached out to City College, Queens College, and made it a CUNY-wide effort. So Faye was doing all of that while she was a student at Hunter. But the counseling part of me took Faye aside and said, Faye, you have to pass that literature course. You got to get your degree. So she said, okay. So between going to demonstrations, all kinds of art events, she was working on her papers, but she did graduate. Faye was phenomenal because not only was she brilliant and a visionary, but she was very involved with the Black movement, the Latino movement. So she learned a lot to understand that we can't do this alone. I'm as pleased as punch that it's grown so much. And the thing that strikes me is that it is a much more inclusive definition of Asian to give the stage to the different groups, which is one of the problems that we had back then. But again, that outreach to bring it all together, because we do not exist in a vacuum. Because the tendency at that time was to stay with your group, especially if you were bilingual. And that was probably one of the hardest lessons for many Asian students to learn if you're going to accomplish something greater. So that's where I think she needs to be lauded in terms of what she has done and what she's contributed, not only at Hunter, but the entire movement. She changed everything she touched, just being who she was. People just saw what she did, and you had to be inspired. So I think that's the next stage of the movement. Pretty much as Faye demonstrated, that you can't do this by yourself. This is something we have to build for ourselves.
Thank you so much to Ruby for sharing such tender memories with us of your friendship and your work as a counselor at Hunter College. I'm gonna actually pass the mic over to Crystal, who had the pleasure of interviewing Ruby. I know it looks like you're muted.
Thank you. I couldn't unmute myself. So yeah, my name is Crystal. I'm a little nervous. My papers are everywhere. But my reflection is that I was in awe of Faye's spirit. That as a young college student, that she had not only the brains for like the admin part and funding part of her basement workshop, but also her creative brains for the, her arts and expression and all her stuff. And her passion and her youthful energy for community activism and commitment to her work. And what this oral history project taught me about identity was that, well, like previously, I don't think I gave much thought to identity because most of my life it was school, and then in my free time, if it wasn't for a Chinese school in Chinatown, it was prep school for like those state exams or regents or whatever we had, SATs, like that's all I had. Memorization and regurgitation of information, little room for reflection and self-expression, except probably in like English classes or history classes, but it wasn't on myself. And so, yeah, what this project taught me was the importance of looking back, whether that's like, even though I was interviewing Ruby, who was talking about Faye, um, I'm talking about like looking back, whether it's like generate over the generations or your personal journey. Yeah, I realized that, you know, identity had a lot to do with community, even though that sounds like common sense, but it finally, like, I feel like hit me now with this project and storytelling. Um, yeah, to realize who you are, you kind of need to know like where you came from, or like to have that sense of belonging or validation of experiences, relating and like having that sense of purpose. So that's really what I learned from this.
Thanks so much, Crystal, for sharing your reflections on this project and also for being a part of this with us. I know that this project wouldn't happen without any of the students. So it's been a really big honor to work alongside you and grow alongside you. So thanks for being here with us. So as we're moving through the timeline towards, we're getting closer and closer to the official establishment of Asian American Studies at Hunter. And I, especially with these stories where we're remembering people and memories that can still be actually very present for a lot of people who may be in the Zoom room today. I invite you to feel free to use the chat to drop any memories, excitement, enthusiasm along the way. And so with that, I am excited to share our next interview with Ligan Wong and Cristina Valeros. Ligan Wong was an activist and artist in New York's Asian American movement and basement workshop throughout the 1960s through the 80s. And as an undergraduate at Queens College in the early 70s, he developed the curriculum and taught the course, The Asian American Experience, for the first time. And then between 1973 to 1976, he served as an adjunct lecturer at Hunter College's Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies. And then from there, he was hired to teach the course, The Asian American Experience, at Hunter. And so in this interview, Ligan speaks with Cristina about his experience coming of age as an Asian American and teaching Asian American studies for the first time at Queens College and Hunter College in the 1970s. This is Ligan Wong with Cristina Valeros.
I grew up in Crown Heights in the 50s. And at that time in New York, there were very few Chinese families. I never had an Asian friend until I entered college. So growing up, it was trying to figure out who I was. So when I was a freshman in college, I did love meeting other Asians and going to the dances and the intercollegiate Chinese football league and softball league. It was great, but I felt like I really wanted more. And it was the anti-war movement was going on pretty strong. And I was against the war in Vietnam, and I used to participate in some of the demonstrations. I learned later on there was going to be this big demonstration in April of '71. It was a national anti-war march on Washington and also in San Francisco. And so I, saw this flyer. There was an Asian contingent that was being organized. But that flyer really impacted on me because I was starting to see, and it was the same with this Asian contingent, that we were seeing the anti-war movement very differently from what was going on in the national anti-war movement, where the main slogan was "Bring our boys home." And the Asian contingent to that march wanted to present a different perspective, that it's a racist war and it was a genocide of the Vietnamese people. They refused to allow our contingent to speak at the rally. So we kind of separated and had our own march through Washington. And it really solidified with me that I was Asian American. But it was also at that time that I was starting to meet other activists, particularly at the Basement Workshop. And it was there that I was meeting people my age who were getting involved politically, and also in terms of thinking about, well, what do we do? How do we get our message across? And I think meeting people from Basement was key for me in terms of my ideas about Asian American studies. Growing up, I wanted to be just like everybody else. I didn't think of myself any different. But when you're out in the real world, people see you differently because of the fact that you are Asian. And I felt that it was really important that other students who look like me really have an understanding of their history, of their experiences here in this country, what it means. Also on the political side, where the policies of this country towards Asia really has an impact on Asian Americans, Asians already in this country. And I guess that led to a number of us who were already in college wanting to develop courses or programs in Asian American studies. I was like in my 20s, I was about ready to leave college and to graduate. And I really needed to put what I was feeling into action. At that time, in late 1971, Fei Chang, she was trying to do something at Hunter College to kick off and start a course on Asian in America. So I really wanted to develop something at Queens College. So I approached my sociology professors, one who knew me very well, liked me and the papers I was developing, because she never read anything like that before about Asians in America. And she got in touch with the honors seminar program at Queens College. And I developed this outline in terms of a curriculum based on history, identity, community, and American involvement in Asia and its impact on Asian Americans. So after doing that, I did have the opportunity to teach this course in September of 72 to December of 72. And then in 73, in January of 73, I graduated from Queens. And then I think that led to Hunter College. I grew up how little they knew about their history. And I asked the students, next time we meet, I want you to ask your parents or your grandparents a little bit about why they came to America and when they came, etc. And let's have a talk about it. So the students came in and we started talking. And one of the things that came out, which I thought was really interesting for me, was students telling me, my mother told me that we're Changs on paper, but then our family name is really Lee. Why did my mother say we couldn't tell anybody that this was happening? It allowed me to immediately go into my lectures about the experience of Chinese America in terms of legislation and what did Chinese have to do in order to come to America and be in America, and the whole concept of paper names. We were able to continue a lot of this because of the fact that Tilden Lamel, who at that time was the chairman of the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies, unknown to me, would come into my classes and he would sit in to find out what was I doing in these classes, And it just happened that I was doing the class on Chinese American history and legislation, and we had that discussion about paper names. He sat through the entire class, taking notes, etc. So I was very nervous throughout that whole period. And then the following week, I get a note in my box, and it says, Professor Lamel wants to see you. I'm going, oh no. And so I went to his office, and he closed the door, and he said, you know, you really were able to draw the personal of your students to what was the history and how that history impacted. I never knew any of this before. And I think it helped establish the legitimacy of that course. I was asked to come back for the next 3 years. I was able to do that course. I think another thing is Asian American Studies would have never gotten off the ground if it wasn't for the support of Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department. They were the only ones that said, yeah, what you want to try to do is important. Come under us. Asian American Studies has always been based on struggle. They're not going to give this to you out of the kindness of their heart. Students have to fight for it. Students have to push for it. And if there's no group that's behind you that continues to promote it, then it kind of withers at that point. And the momentum that it's built withers away. So among Asian American student activists, we have to like continue to promote it, but also develop this group behind you of other students so they know the importance of it. We got to make Asian American studies not only just for Asian students. We have to have administrators understand that what we're offering and what we're trying to teach is important for all students, that they have a better understanding of who that Asian person sitting next to you in class is, the experience of that person, etc.
Thanks so much to Ligon and to Christina. And I'm actually going to pass the mic to Christina, who was our producer for this interview.
Hi, y'all. Honestly, just listening to the piece has reminded me of how energizing and healing this project was. I really enjoyed my conversation with Lee, and I think for me, in terms of learning new things, I learned so much about kind of the history of Asian American studies at Hunter and the role that cross-racial solidarity played, what its roots looked like. And so really just hearing him kind of reflect on his conversations with the chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department, thinking about the chair kind of sitting in on his classes and taking notes, and really just hearing about how integral kind of their involvement was to, as he was talking about, kind of establishing like the legitimacy and the credibility of the course. I think at the time of the project, I was struggling a lot with what kind of cross-racial solidarity looked like outside of kind of more historical examples that we were kind of talking about. And I think it was really after kind of this project that I kind of left with a better kind of clarity about what it looked like, not only in kind of like a higher education setting, but also like on like our campus. And I think, in reflecting upon it further, in terms of how it kind of changed the way I was viewing Asian American studies, I left thinking a lot about the role of legacy when we're talking about student activism. And I think before I really thought it was enough to just have a group that is committed to doing the work. But I think after kind of the conversation, I was thinking a lot about kind of the importance of having a foundation, the importance of momentum, this idea that when people graduate, like what happens, and making sure that at the end of the day, like you're not just doing the work, but you're also making sure that there's some kind of foundation that exists for people to kind of continue it and pick it back up.
Thanks so much, Christina, for such a meaningful reflection. I think that's a lot of what we're thinking about here with this project too, as after 3 years, we are finally showing all of these pieces, but how does this continue and how does this work, this history continue? And I firmly believe that you all are continuing this history, continuing this legacy that so many of these activists built for us. And so I'm really, really excited to kind of piggyback off what Ligon was saying about how we want to show, a lot of the work is to show administrators about how important this work is. And so with our next interview, we're bringing Shirley Hune and Shakila Khan, and I see that Shirley and Shakila are both in the Zoom room. Shirley Hune was previously the assistant provost and professor of education at Hunter College. In 1989, she brought the annual Association for Asian American Studies conference to the East Coast at Hunter College for the very first time. She was instrumental to the development of Asian American Studies at Hunter during her time as assistant provost between 1990 and 1992, and in its official founding in 1993. She previously served as the president of the Association for Asian American Studies, and she's currently the professor emerita of urban planning at UCLA and educational leadership and policy studies at the University of Washington. And in this interview, Shirley talks with Shakila about her instrumental role as Hunter's assistant provost in bringing Asian American Studies to Hunter College and the East Coast. So this is Shirley Hune with Shakila Khan.
My family has now been part of Chinese Canadian history for 5 generations, and I'm part of the 2.5 generation. I moved to the United States in conjunction with getting married to a graduate student at the University of Michigan. So in wandering around campus, I saw a sign that said Asian American Studies or Roots, and apparently there was a lecture on campus about Asian American Studies. So I went. It was a tour that people working on the now classic work Roots were taking across the country to talk to people about Asian American Studies. When I attended that meeting, that's when the light bulb went off, the epiphany. And I said, that's what's missing. That's what I want to do. I tried to figure out how I was going to do it. And I decided to then go to graduate school and to get a PhD. And my goal was to teach Asian American Studies. And there was no place to do it. And one of the places that I found was George Washington University, because I was a grad student at George Washington University. And I went to the University of Maryland College Park, which has an American Studies program. And so being an American civilization doctoral student, I said, could I teach a course on the Asian American experience? There are lots of what we would call syllabi and course curriculum compendium being put together. And this is when the community people were very active because there are very few faculty members. And then the community people were saying, well, I know about garment workers, healthcare, or I know about this matter or that matter. And so they could come and teach. So that's what we were doing. We were just gathering stuff. We weren't really that knowledgeable about how universities worked. We weren't thinking of, oh, we're going to get a department and a program and endowed chairs. We were not there yet in the mid 1970s. What we wanted was a course. I would teach about the history of Asian Americans, about race and racism as it impacted Asian Americans in my other courses. I'm here to give you a sense of the history and contributions of a group of people who are significant in the development of the United States. That's the kind of things that I would do, because that's the only way one could do it. And eventually we knew that we would have to go a step further in the academy to get what we would call faculty lines, permanent teaching positions. And that was a different struggle and a longer struggle. It's still struggling. I remarried. My husband and I went to New York City, and he had obtained a job at Brooklyn College. And I found a position at first Medgar Evers College, and then I was later recruited to Hunter College. So I spent nearly 15 years in New York City. There's a long struggle in New York City, which has ebbed and flowed within the CUNY system that has been both exciting but very disappointing in terms of the responses from administration to getting courses for students of CUNY. CUNY was having a budget crisis, so many lines being cut. And I don't think that's an excuse by eliminating Asian American Studies. A national association. And I deliberately chose a theme of global and comparative perspectives to transform our thinking at the time away from California. To just say Asian American Studies is not just California. It's here, it's in New York. It was clearly lively and memorable. You just have to do Asian American Studies where you're at. You can't wait for that job that's going to give you a tenure track line. In 1990, I was recruited to be associate dean. So I went into administration myself, and I hadn't actually planned for that at all. I didn't think of administration as being in my career track, but I was going to move from Brooklyn to Manhattan to be closer to work. And an offer came from UCLA at the same time. It was really exciting because I would get to be responsible for the 4 ethnic studies research centers. Like many Asian Americans, I thought I should have a West Coast experience. When I say you do your work where you're at, if you're not a faculty member in a tenure track position and you're doing something else, you can still do something about it because you can be influencing curriculum as a dean. You can be giving student opportunities for learning about more careers as a faculty member who is in charge of student clubs. And my experience as administration led me to write a series of works on the barriers that face Asian American women, from student to staff to faculty to campus president. And to me, that's also doing Asian American studies. The development of Asian American studies is often a coming together of different forces that help to make things happen. It's a part of reforming higher education as an institution, and I view it as a movement. It's meant to be transformative. I use Asian American studies in the context of it's a social movement to transform how we think, how we know, what we do, and also to develop a knowledge base that more accurately reflects the lived experience and activities and dreams and aspirations of the people of Asian descent in the US.
Thanks so much to Shirley Hune. I know that you're in the Zoom right now with us, and also to Shakila for doing this interview together. I still feel so many feelings, and it all resonates with me, but I'm gonna pass the mic over to Shakila to talk to us about this interview.
Hi everyone, I'm Shakila, and it was such a pleasure to speak with Shirley. And prior to this project, my knowledge on Asian American studies was limited to something I thought only existed on the West Coast. And my conversations with Shirley really emphasized that Asian American studies is not just at places like UC Berkeley, and that from the 1970s at least, there's been a long history and collective effort to bring this knowledge to people on the East Coast, right? From organizing and demanding Asian American studies on campuses, co-creating syllabi with other organizers and friends and community members that you know, or doing things like establishing conferences and creating spaces for community. One thing that surprised me is how spontaneous and resourceful early community members were when there was no existing infrastructure for Asian American studies. Shirley describes how she teach Intro to Asian American Studies across campuses in the tri-state area and commute from Medgar Evers to New Haven and to other universities. And she says that those are the things I would do because that was the only way to do it. And so there was a determination and a drive that I really admired about her and other community members that helped bring Asian American Studies onto campuses. And again, from the very beginning, it wasn't about like establishing a department or a major. It was just like getting this knowledge out to young people. And I think that that's really powerful.
Thanks, Shakila, for such a thoughtful reflection. I relate to so much of that, especially, when this project started, we were in person, and then we had to also just kind of figure it out along the way when we had to all go virtual. So I feel like the legacy of Shirley's work continues to this day at Hunter and also in this oral history project. So thank you, Shakila, and thank you, Shirley, for sharing with us these important stories. And so I'm excited to continue on down the road of Asian American Studies. So now we've established the department in 1993. But even before then, we had students who were really passionate about Asian American studies. And so this next interview is between Jita Pai and Daniel Iskakov. Jita Pai is a Hunter alum who graduated from the English Language Arts and Education Department in 1986. She went on to receive her master's and PhD in South Asian Studies at UC Berkeley. And so we see the impact, even before the program came to be established, we see the impact of that work in Jita as she continues her studies. She is currently at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, where she serves as a professor in the history department and the director of the International and Global Studies program, with a specific focus on introducing the history of South Asia and the South Asian diaspora. In this interview, Jita talks with Daniel about the impact of her family history and the Bay Area's Third World Liberation Movement on her identity and research as a South Asian American. This is Jita Pai with Daniel Iskakov.
I am the firstborn child of immigrants. My parents left their small villages in South India and immigrated to the US during the early 1960s so that my father could study for his PhD in biochemistry at the University of Texas, Austin. And my father wanted to come to the US because he had high hopes for the sort of financial security he would get by completing his graduate degree and securing a research position in America. However, he did not realize the level of poverty he would face when he arrived from India. I also recall the isolation my parents faced, being separated from one's family in India, and of trying to adopt to a new culture. And so one of my favorite pictures of my mom is looking really elegant, draped in a light blue sari, while wearing a cowboy hat. I also remember my mom trying to find food substitutions for certain Indian ingredients because they were not available in America at that time. So for instance, using Rice Krispies for puffed rice to make this spicy snack that they would have with tea or coffee. And so I believe that my parents started to live the American dream when shortly after my brother's birth, 7 years after mine, my father left his academic position to accept a research job as a biochemist at the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Martinez in Northern California. And so I found it instead to be a place where my parents, for the first time since they arrived in America, had a kind of financial security that they never previously experienced. As a child, I began to understand what it meant to be an Asian American through my father when he fought anti-Asian discrimination in his workplace. In his laboratory at the Veterans Administration Medical Center, he authored over 300 scientific journal articles. So despite the productive scholarship and accolades, he was kept from being promoted. And so this encouraged my father to participate in an equal employment opportunity complaint against the hospital medical director that a third generation Chinese American doctor named Dr. Edmund Zheng initiated beginning in 1975. And so for me, my father's involvement in this case was not only an early lesson on blatant racism, but also recognition that we're part of a larger group called Asian Americans. In California is also where my sister and I would be two of only 3 students of color in the entire elementary school. Growing up, I think my parents did not quite understand the difficulties my sister and I faced as we tried to embrace our East Indianness while growing up in an American society. There was also an element to keep us as Indian as possible, and that is because of the ethno-linguistic community that we're from, called the Konkanese, from southwestern India. The Portuguese colonial government engaged in systematic attempts to erase Konkanese of their beliefs and cultural identity. So Konkani now is only a spoken language. There is no script. Given that we are from this small community, my parents tried to reinforce in us the importance of retaining and embodying our culture. When I arrived in New York City in 1983, I was shocked to see so many people of South Asian descent, particularly in the micro neighborhood of Jackson Heights, Queens. And I saw not only one small grocery store as we had in California, but several South Asian grocery stores, restaurants, and gift shops. It felt truly amazing because I never had the opportunity to understand what it meant to be part of a larger South Asian community until I moved to New York, where I saw not only South Indians like my parents and relatives, but also Indians from other parts of the subcontinent, as well as Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Nepalese, and Sri Lankans. I enrolled in Hunter College. As an undergraduate student, I was part of its urban teacher education program called Training Tomorrow's Teachers. My first lessons in Asian American history did not happen until I started graduate school at UC Berkeley. It was there I realized my ability to learn this history was a product of a struggle that began in the late 1960s in Northern California. And the Third World Liberation Front was a multiracial coalition of student groups who, through strikes, demanded a curriculum designed for and taught by people of color to bring ethnic studies into mainstream narratives and education, and brought about the first Asian American studies curricula to be established at San Francisco State University, UC Berkeley, and UCLA. So it was truly an awakening for me that the activism led by Bay Area students of color was the reason I could learn about my own Asian American history. And so I understood that my immigrant family is also part of that history, because I also recognize that the history of South Asian Americans has deep roots in the Bay Area where I grew up. Because in the early 20th century, hundreds of South Asians, primarily Sikhs, came to North America from Punjab, establishing one of the first Indian communities in the US while working on the Western Pacific Railroad or as agricultural laborers. And so as a historian of South Asia, I try not to leave out the South Asian American experience because there are often links between the South Asian history as well as the South Asian American history. Despite our presence in the US, members of my family have been told to go back from where you came from, even though they were born in the US. I feel like they'll never see me as American. They'll always see me as being someone other. And so I became the first woman in my family on both sides to attend college and the only woman in my family to earn a PhD. And I began to think that perhaps the best way for me to help the cause of good in the world was to empower others to question, to analyze universal questions, and that I would do that through teaching. And so I started teaching Asian American history first as a graduate student instructor and now as a professor. And so I teach about what I myself experience or what members of my family experience. For me, ethnic studies is important not only for people of color to know about their own histories and cultures, but for other people to know as well. It provides an avenue for us to embrace all cultures and inform our world. It provides a way for us to understand one another and to understand the current climate. It's important to look at the historical context. So I believe an Asian American program and center will help everyone understand that history.
Thank you, Jita, and to Daniel for sharing so much about your own personal family and also the influences that really brought you to where you are today in teaching. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to share a few reflections on the process for producing this interview.
Hi, everyone. So Gita's interview was one of the last interviews that I did for this project. So it was really powerful to see the legacy that ethnic studies had, both on students like myself, who was an Asian American studies minor, and professors alike. And, you know, Gita's project, talking to Gita as part of this project also made me realize that Asian American studies is part of a broader struggle. I realized this by talking to other narrators, but hearing her talk about it also made me realize that, you know, Asian American studies has so much multiplicity that not even just on the East Coast, but on the West Coast. And I was also happy to see how much Asian American studies has progressed since its founding. So, you know, one of my interviewees was Shanlin Wu, and he was talking about how C.T. Wu's first Asian American studies classes were focused on the Chinese Americans and their experiences in America with the Chinese Exclusion Act. So hearing Gita talk about how she's focusing on South Asian American studies has really shown how much Asian American studies has progressed to be inclusive of other Asian groups in America. And it made me feel more at home in Asian American studies. And, from all these interviews, I really was glad to learn about how, Asian American studies was part of broader forms of advocacy. And it ultimately, really inspired me to become an advocate myself in the community.
Thanks so much, Daniel. For folks who don't know, Daniel was one of the students who really took on quite a few of these interviews. So he conducted and recorded and produced so many interviews in this project. And so with that, I'm so thankful to have been working alongside you and to really grow alongside you in this evolution of Asian American Studies program and this project. So thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Gita, for being a part of this with us. And so I am super excited to take us to our very last interview between Patricia Eng and Victoria Lopez. Patricia, or also known as Pat, graduated from Hunter College High School in 1977 and the Hunter School of Social Work in 1983. As a grad student, she started the New York Asian Women's Center as a student project. Then over the next 40 years, it grew into the organization Womankind to provide multilingual and culturally responsive services for survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual violence. Today, Pat serves as the president and chief executive officer of Asian Americans Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, APIP, and continues her work to direct resources to Asian American communities and women of color. In this final interview, Pat talks with Victoria about her time as a graduate student at the Hunter School of Social Work to grow the New York Asian Women's Center, now known as Womankind, from a student project in the 1980s to the organization it is today. This is Patricia Eng with Victoria Lopez.
I grew up in an Italian neighborhood where I think there was one other Chinese family on the block. I'm the youngest of 5 daughters. Chinese families always long for a boy, and with 4 other daughters ahead of me and nobody behind me. And I always knew that I was my parents' last hope for a boy. My parents would joke with our Italian neighbors. There was one family that had also a son the same age as me. And so they joked about exchanging kids, right? So that they could have a boy and the other family could have a girl. And so that stayed with me, right? Of course, it was a joke. I feel loved by my parents, certainly, but it really struck me at a very early age that girls were different from boys and not as valued. Back in the day when I was at Hunter College High School, up until the very last year, it was all girls. In that last year, the first boys came into the school, and the conversations by the administration and the faculty about how to prepare for having boys was to beef up science and math. And it really made me wonder, why is it not good enough for boys? And why is that just okay for girls? At Princeton as well, I was nominated president of the Asian American Students Association, which I think was my first experience in a leadership role. And there were dynamics that came to play out that also struck me around sexism. I would hear that I was maybe not demure enough as a woman, that I was scaring off the guys. It was eye-opening for me and starts me on that lifelong journey with those early experiences of race, class, and gender that are really indelibly etched into my soul and what I want to do with my life. Back then, there were no Asian American Studies program. Maybe in my 3rd year at Princeton, a group advocated for an Asian American Studies course with the university, and so we were given an ad hoc course. right after graduating from Princeton. I went to Silberman Hunter College School of Social Work. There weren't very many field placements that were offered in the Asian American community. In my second year, I created my own field placement by connecting with a social worker. She was not Asian American, but there was no such field placement. And when I spoke with this woman, she said, I'm happy to be your supervisor, but I am not an expert in the community. I am an expert around domestic violence. I pulled together a group of other women who were working in the community or who had interest in Asian American women. And I asked them whether or not they would be interested in coming together just to talk about the needs of Asian American women. And in some ways, it was kind of like a consciousness raising group, really talking about the issues from different perspectives. And practically all of the women who were there knew somebody either personally or professionally who had experienced domestic violence. Back at that time, there was only one shelter that was focused on helping Asian women who have experienced domestic violence, and that was in LA. There was another group that was being formed in San Francisco, but that was it. So this was the effort that we were trying on the East Coast. Throughout that year, we said, yes, let's become an organization. One thing led to another, and it became become an organization. One thing led to another, and it became an actual organization. And it was very exciting to do that work. It was so new. And so we could create whatever it was that we wanted to create. And out of that grew what was originally called the New York Asian Women's Center, which is now known as Womankind. I had such a wonderful experience with the New York Asian Women's Center, growing it from a student project into an actual organization. Because anytime you start something from scratch, you learn everything about it, what it takes to run an organization. From fixing the copier to writing grant proposals to representing an organization in city meetings. I learned so much more about gender, race, and class along the way, and how that impacts someone's life journey, impacts policy making. What we accomplished in those years was to build a solid foundation for a nonprofit service-based organization based on our core political understanding and analysis of the issue of domestic violence, the issues that Asian American women face. New York Asian Women's Center became the first organization on the East Coast focused on addressing domestic violence in the Asian American community. At the time, domestic violence also was new terminology. There were very few organizations that focused on women of color. So we had no idea that this was going to become an organization that is now core to the Asian American community in New York City. For me, it was a simultaneous embracing of my identity as an Asian American woman alongside an identity as a woman of color. For me, the experiences of racism and sexism are so interconnected and intertwined that I think that they need to always be talked about together. It is very exciting to me that there are AAPI students now who are interested, and that there has been a continuous flow of now multiple generations to learn about our own history and to really claim our identity in a way that is full in whatever ways that make sense and feel right for you. We don't just have to be Asian American. That's not necessarily a foremost identity, but I feel like it is an important core. I feel like I still have many gaps in my own knowledge around Asian American history. It is still a journey and not a destination. It is still evolving, and I'm hoping that all of us are a part of that history in the making.
Oh, what a powerful way to close, Pat. I know that Pat's not with us today, but we do have Victoria here with us. I'd love to pass you the mic to talk about your experience with this interview.
Sure. Thanks, Rochelle. Yeah, listening back to that interview, I mean, it feels like it's so long ago. It's almost like 2 years ago now that I spoke to Pat. But what I remember during that interview is being so surprised at, I don't know, her honesty about how the organization was formed, saying that, they had no idea that it would grow into this big organization, this like foundational organization on the East Coast that focused on domestic violence and really supported Asian women with these issues. And it's surprising to me as, a student interviewing Pat, who's like the president of this organization and founded such an important organization in Chinatown, to see that, she started basically with what she had and with the people around her and with the resources that she had. She didn't necessarily have these like lofty ambitions of, creating this huge organization. She really just wanted to make a change and was like curious about, what she could do with these other people if they started with, a small goal of like helping women get out of like domestic violence situations. And it grew into this huge organization. So what that really taught me was that you can sort of show up where you are and make changes where you are with what you have and what skills you have, whatever resources are around you. And it's really helped me personally feel more empowered in the work that I do with Asian American queer organizations in New York City. Because sometimes like when I'm helping organize events, for example, we don't always feel like we have all the resources in the world at our disposal, but we still push on because we know that there's a possibility that the work that we're doing can blossom into something bigger and be important to people in the future. And I think that's really the legacy of Asian American studies. It's like learn about this history in order to empower ourselves to ultimately make changes in the community, to like go out into the world and use the history that we've learned about to make changes in the future.
Oh, thanks so much, Victoria, for such a thoughtful reflection. I mean, I relate to so much of that. And yeah, thank you so much for being a part of this project and actually for bringing me into this project from the very beginning. So thank you for that. And so as we start to kind of close out, thank you to everyone who has been here with us. Joyce, okay, there we go, perfect. I just want to thank everybody for being here with us. Thank you especially to the students who have ridden out these past 3 wild years with us in this project, to all of our narrators who are here and who are here in spirit, to our faculty, Lynn and Vivian and Caitlin, and all the folks who were able to make this happen with us. And of course, thank you to all of you for being here to listen and learn and celebrate with us. And of course, time travel from all the way from the 1950s all the way through today. Through our 22 narrators, we've learned so much about the roots of the Asian American Studies program here at Hunter College, and also about what has grown from all of this work and all that has blossomed from those roots. And so as we've been moving through this project, it has been such a meaningful experience for me, and I know for our students and faculty, because we're not only here to learn about the histories, but we're also here actively contributing to it by building this archive, by engaging with the people whose shoulders we stand on today. And so something that I've learned through my oral history work and my organizing work is that oral history can really never truly be objective between the narrator and an interviewer, because as the interviewer, we bring ourselves, our histories, our curiosities, our interests to every interview. And each student brought exactly that to every interview. They brought their own histories, their interests in the questions that they asked, in the stories that they produced, and the students, in bringing themselves, are the ones who really made the interviews happen, just as much as the oral history training that prepared them. And so all throughout this process, our students were history makers, piecing together this tapestry of stories that make up the Asian American Studies program here at Hunter College. And just like it did with our students, this program brought me in too. I mean, I became an active participant, learning from our narrators, from our students, from faculty about Asian American history, my home here in Chinatown, my neighbors, and also myself as an Asian American woman. And I wasn't just a consultant coming in to teach oral history, but I became part of this project with you all as a learner, and all of this I am able to bring back to apply in my own life as a resident and organizer here in Chinatown. And so what I hope that this project really brought to all of us is that it's important for us, and it's possible for us to learn about our histories, about our roots, from the people around us. And it doesn't have to be just from celebrities that we see on TV, or we don't have to, like Shirley Hume said, we don't have to wait around for somebody to tell us about to tell us that we're allowed to be here. We can look to each other, we can look to our loved ones, our neighborhoods, our communities, to learn these histories, because oral history really extends far beyond the interview itself. It impacts the way we fill in the gaps in history. It impacts the ways that we connect with each other and build relationships and communicate. It also impacts how we see ourselves in relation to the rest of the world all around us. And so I hope that these histories that we heard tonight don't just end here with the event or with this project, but I hope that we can continue to bring this legacy of community activism that really blossomed the Asian American Studies program, and continue it today and far into the future with every student, faculty member, learner that passes through the Asian American Studies program. And so I hope that we all are so excited to jump through these doorways that oral history opens up for us in learning about each other, learning about ourselves, and learning about the world around us. And I want to close out just my part by saying that I am so deeply honored and so proud to be a part of these histories together with you all. I'm especially so proud of all the students who really stuck it out with us over the past 3 years. It really has been such a privilege and such a joy to grow alongside you all. So thank you for bringing me into the fold with you all. And I'll turn it over to Vivian to close us out.
I was muted. So it would help if I did not, was not muted. I hope you enjoyed this listening event for the Hunter community to celebrate a key piece of the Hunter Asian American Studies Oral History Project. You know, the year 2023 will mark the 30th anniversary of the Asian American Studies program here at Hunter. And Hunter will host an in-person event, a public event, to highlight the broader learnings from the alumni, the family members of alumni, the faculty, the administrators, who were interviewed by our amazing oral history student team. And their stories tell the story of Asian America from the 1930s to the early 1990s. Their stories tell the story of New York City, of New York State, of our nation. We learned of the foundational role played by the then Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department at Hunter College. Now it is called the Department of Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies. From its founding chair, Dr. John Henrik Clark, to its later chair, Dr. Tilden Lamel, who went on to become Hunter's provost and then acting president. We learned that so many of New York City's key Asian American serving organizations were founded, led, or staffed by Hunter College alums. Harold Lee and Sons, a family-owned business in Manhattan, Chinatown, the oldest insurance agency serving Asian New Yorkers, the Chinatown Health Foundation, the Asian American Bar Association of New York, co-founded by Rocky Chin, who also taught the Asian American Experience course at Hunter, the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, or CACF, whose board chair is Hunter alum Larry Lee, who was also interviewed for this project. The Asian American Foundation, whose founding director is Kao Oh, another amazing Hunter alum. We learned amazing things about our own faculty, like Professor John Chin, who co-founded the Asian and Pacific Islander Coalition on HIV/AIDS. Professor Margaret Chin, who was an activist at Hunter back in the day, working with Dr. Shirley Kuhn. This was long before they joined the faculty here. As already has been mentioned, this project was a lifeline, a comfort for so many of us living through the first days of the pandemic when things seemed so bleak and the anti-Asian hate that erupted with such fury. The past really helped us think through the present and move us towards the future. It's really been just such an honor to work with Lynn, Rochelle, Luigi, and our amazing students and our amazing narrators. So I want to close by just saying, join us again soon in a public event to learn this history and the steps towards the future, including for Asian American Studies at Hunter College. Till then, wishing us all the very best, but I also think Ro wants us to take a selfie. Thank you.
Yes, I do. I do want us to memorialize. I mean, we're writing history here, so we might as well memorialize this moment too. So if folks feel comfortable, we'd love for you to just show your face for just a moment so that our amazing event producer, Joyce Ma, who has been working all of the tech for us, can take a photo for us. So first, I wanted to thank Joyce for all of your work and everybody who has been part of this team. If folks feel inclined to turn your cameras on, then we would love to take a quick photo with you all. If not, then we'll just take a cute selfie with the folks who are on.
Absolutely. A big thank you to Joyce Ma. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Okay, let us know when you're ready, Joyce.
I can cue you. 1, 2, 3. All right. Will we like another one?
Okay, let's do one more just in case.
Hold up. Let's see how fast I can actually paste this one so I can do another one. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Got it. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I hope you have a restful evening, and feel free to contact us if you ever have any questions or you're just so excited and you want to hear more stories. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.